We've got a lot of material to get through, and so I'm going to go fairly quickly. So yeah, you just heard a bit about my background, and what I wanted to do is place that in a larger context. So I'm Chief Data Officer for the City of Boston. I think most of you probably think of the City of Boston as a place, but for us it's an organization. It's an organization with more than 17,000 employees working in dozens of different areas. We have a budget of almost $5 billion. So putting it in perspective, this would be the equivalent of roughly a Fortune 500 company. We are working in support of all of these programs in the citywide analytics team. So the team itself, as many things in government are, was created because somebody announced it in a speech. The mayor mentioned this just over 2 years ago in the State of the City speech, and so we had an analytics team. But really, this was a culmination of various efforts that the city has done to make use of data and analytics going back for the past 5 years. These are just some of the milestones that we've done over the years leading up to where we are today. And you'll notice it's bookended with our work on open data. The first notable thing that our team had done was 5 years ago launched the city's first open data portal. And as some of you might have heard if you attended the panel session yesterday, we just went live on the beta release of our new open data portal, Analyze Boston, which is notably not called the Open Data Portal anymore because we want to democratize data and make it something that's accessible to people who don't think of themselves as data people. But so our team covers a lot of ground. We run the city's main performance management program and working directly with departments to improve how they do their work. We do enterprise analytics, supporting the tools and infrastructure and data sources for departments to use data in their own work. We run the open data programs that I just mentioned, and we're also doing more and more every day to use data science to find new things that we can do as a city to improve how we serve our constituents and find new opportunities for things the city was never able to do before. So just to give a sense of what we've been working on up until now, one of the main things we do is dashboards. This is a picture of the mayor in his office. We have a few different dashboards there. On the upper right, you can see the dashboard for our 311 system. So that's where we collect citizen service requests. And so he can see requests that are coming in, look at trends, look at performance in resolving those issues. On the lower right is something we call City Score, which is essentially our performance dashboard for the city as a whole, where we look at big picture metrics and try to get a better sense of how things are going overall. You know, it's not something that we just use to highlight certain things. We use it to figure out, what are we doing well and what can we do better on. And the key here that you can see is, the mayor can see these directly. He doesn't have to wait for somebody to tell him there's a problem. We're putting it in front of him. We're putting it in front of cabinet chiefs and others throughout the city so that we can see what's happening in real time and be much more responsive and improve how we're doing our work. We've also done a lot of work with mapping. We have an enterprise GIS system that we use to support all different operations throughout the city around transportation and public safety and so forth. We also build custom applications. This one here, something called our Building Intelligence System. And it's something we built for the fire department where they wanted, when they go to respond to a call, to know about things like hazards in the area, hazardous materials, construction, and so forth. And so what this allows the dispatchers to do is when they're sending fire trucks to a location, they can pull up information from across different source systems like our inspectional services and permitting databases and have that right in front of them. And we're working to expand this model to do similar things for police and EMS and others who want to be able to access information quickly. We're working to build this out not only as a web application, but as a mobile dashboard that can be loaded onto tablets or mobile phones. So we do a lot of work around mapping. We have other applications we've built, for example, tracking snowplows, which is particularly relevant now given that my team has been delayed here because of about 12 inches of snow coming down today. We also have, at this point, 3 open data portals, the original one, as well as a separate mapping portal. And then the new Analyze Boston portal is going to be a central hub that combines both of those into a single place that people can go to pull up all of our open data sets from one source. And then, as I mentioned, we run the city's performance management program. So we've done work with the 311 system, with EMS, with the fire department and others to optimize all different parts of what they do, from how we prioritize different kinds of EMS calls and determine do we need to send an ambulance to this location right away, or is this something where this is really a social service request and we need to have a different kind of response? Or we are able to look at, say, 311 call center performance and see how do we make sure that we're always providing a consistent level of service there, and that when people call, it's actually going to be answered in a timely manner. But so what I wanted to get into today was talking about how we're developing this program going forward and doing more with, I think, what everybody here would think of as core data science. So there's a lot we can do. And as I mentioned, we cover a ton of different areas in the city's work. And we work with almost every department in the city. And that gives us an opportunity to work on all sorts of really critical issues. We've done work around things like addiction. We're working more and more with places like the public schools to figure out, how do we identify students at risk or who are affected by things like fires or crimes in a neighborhood and so forth. We're going to be expanding our work in the area of trying to prevent homelessness. Finding people who are at risk of becoming homeless to see if there's any kind of early intervention that we can provide that might stop that from happening in the first place. But it's also a challenge to do this in the city context. The first challenge that we run into, and really I think connects to why we're here, is building the technical infrastructure for doing this is a huge challenge. It's like working at any private company, except we have a much larger scale given how many different programs we work with, and we're doing it with a much smaller budget with a lot of constraints about how we can spend resources. And as we do that, we also have to think about the governance aspect of how do we handle the public's data in a way that protects their privacy, but also complies with things like public records laws. And we spend a lot of time thinking about, if we are collecting data, how is that going to be used down the road? And not wanting to do things with the data which could have adverse consequences downstream. So we really have to think very consciously and conscientiously as we're working with data, what are the long-term implications going to be? And then finally, on the tech expertise side, we're a young team and have a lot of very skilled people, but we cover so many different areas that we don't have what I refer to as full-stack data scientists, people who've got a lot of experience at working at all different levels. Instead, there's a lot more specialization. So it's often a challenge to figure out what's the right combination of people and skills and tools for any given project. But to highlight a few of the things that we've done so far, one of the most notable uses of data science has been in our restaurant inspections. So going back to last summer, we've been prioritizing all of our impromptu restaurant inspections, that is the ones that aren't the scheduled annual inspections, based on machine learning algorithms. And what we do is we combine a variety of different data sources, not only a restaurant's inspection history and location, but things like information about the property or the neighborhood or what's going on in terms of property complaints from citizens and so forth. We're even bringing in things like Yelp data to see if somebody says, for example, that they saw rats at this restaurant. That makes its way into our models, and that can help us to say, well, maybe there's something we need to go check out there. And what we found is when we do this, we do a lot better than if we just did it the way it's always been done, which is giving restaurant inspectors total discretion in figuring out where they want to go for the drop-in inspections. And the comparison here isn't just we're going to randomize this and do everything on the same schedule. The comparison is that this was a sort of ad hoc choice made by individuals. And some of them probably did a really great job at that. Some of them, maybe not. If somebody doesn't know the neighborhood they're working in, or they're just new at the job, maybe they don't have access to the kind of information that we do. And so here what we're able to do is to say, let's take all of the different data sources available to us, combine them into something which predicts where are we most likely to find a critical violation if we go. And we found that that ultimately increases the rate at which we find these violations by 20 or 25%. And the key here is that this isn't just a inspectional services question. It's not just about trying to find violations so we can find people. This is really about public health, because we don't go and inspect places to be jerks. We do it because we're trying to protect the safety of the people who eat there or buy food there. And so by doing this, what it means is we're more able to find these problems, and we're able to respond to them much more quickly than if we just waited for regularly scheduled inspections or we just left it up to the discretion of the inspectors to determine where they go. So we're moving to extend this model to other areas where we're thinking about what is a risk that we can respond to proactively. So things like, how do we find a student who might be at risk of dropping out of school, or somebody who might be at risk of becoming homeless? And the idea across all of these models is to say, well, if we can combine all the different data sources available to us and identify problems before they occur, it's a lot easier to address these problems before we hit a crisis than waiting for something really bad to happen and then trying to clean up the mess after the fact. Similarly, we've done work with our Public Health Commission on the issue of opioids and addiction. Like many cities, we've had an issue with the opioid crisis, and we're working really hard to solve that. The Public Health Commission has done a lot of work to create recovery services programs to support people who are in need of treatment and helping them get the support they need. What we're working with them on is figuring out how do we apply technology to do that better. So one of the things we recently completed was a planned grant proposal to work with the Public Health Commission to build a more tech-enabled stack for how they do their what they call 311 recovery services program. So as I mentioned earlier, 311 is how we collect citizen service requests. And last year we rolled out 311 for recovery services, which was essentially connecting our citizen service helpline to the programs at the Public Health Commission, which connect people to treatment services. And what we worked with them to propose is a program which would essentially extend that model all the way out to enable more channels of communication and better tracking and response to these requests to make sure that the people who need services are able to get access to them through whatever medium is best for them, whether that's through a phone or online or through text or what have you, and that we also make sure that we properly follow up and we're not just hoping that somebody answers the phone when they call. Part of the idea behind this for us is that we also want to be able to do more to help them identify people who are in need of their support and connect them to the care they need. So last year we piloted a program to identify people in our EMS system who are at risk of having an overdose. So what this looked at were people who had an interaction with EMS, whether they just got treatment on a scene or they got transported by ambulance to a hospital for something other than an overdose. And so what this pilot program looked at is to say, well, can we figure out things that suggest a person is at risk of having an overdose in the future? And what we found is, yes, we can do this. We can predict pretty well. And it's not through any sort of weird data science magic. What it really is saying, how do we parse through, for example, the EMS reports on the patients? So what they might say is, patient reported a history of drug use. They weren't being brought in for an overdose, but there was a very clear sign there that this is somebody who might have a problem. And the idea here is that if we can make this work, what we can do is try to, again, direct proactive interventions before things reach a crisis point in order to get ahead of some of these problems and not just wait for things to go really wrong and then try to pick up the pieces afterwards. Another program that I'm really excited about that we recently started is a collaborative project with a group called Data for Democracy, a recently founded volunteer group of data scientists to predict crashes on our streets. So like many cities, we deal with a lot of traffic and we deal with a lot of traffic safety concerns. And so in the course of this work, we've collected a lot of really interesting and exciting data. The map you see here is actually something we call our Vision Zero Safety Concerns Map. This is actually a map of citizen-reported problems all throughout the city on the streets. So there are a few pre-selected categorizations for the kinds of things people might want to report. And then we also give them an option for reporting something else or adding their own details as text. And the data collection process here has been a huge success. I mean, we have thousands and thousands of citizen-submitted complaints about, for example, places where pedestrians aren't given enough time to cross, or drivers don't yield in a crosswalk, or there just isn't enough room for bikes. And we can use this map right now to respond to complaints on a one-time basis at individual places or in response to particular clusters. but we don't have any way to use this in an overall sense. And so what we want to do in this project is to combine this data set with others that we have around things like traffic volume and roadway conditions and so forth, in order to predict where are the most dangerous places in the city and see what we can do to address that before we wait to see, if somebody gets hit by a car while riding a bike or trying to cross the street. What we're trying to do is to say, what are the conditions that suggest that that's likely to happen, so that we can then try to address some of those problems before it gets to that point. So whether that means adding a protected bike lane or changing the light timing or making an intersection no turn on red. There are a lot of different things we can do, and at that point we would work very closely with our transportation department to figure out what's the best solution for any of these problems. But the exciting challenge for us here is to say, we have all these data sources, now let's find a way to combine them into something that at a very high level tells us all throughout the city where our problems are most likely to occur. So just to wrap up, I wanted to put this work that we're doing in a broader context and talk about something that I've started calling civic data science. So this isn't a technical definition pulled from somewhere. This is something I put together the first time I talked about this, where I defined civic data science as the use of data science to support groups like governments or nonprofits or political groups in order to help them do their work to have a positive social impact. And there are 2 points in here that I think I want to focus on. One is when I say data science and data science methods, I'm using a really broad approach to that. So some of that might be machine learning or experimental testing and so forth. Some of that might just be more basic data management and analysis. Basically, it's the scientifically informed use of data in support of these missions. And that gets to the second point that I want to focus on, which is, what does it mean to have a positive social impact? Well, ultimately, that's a subjective thing. I think for other people who are talking about the same work, what might be a positive social impact to you might be abhorrent to me, or vice versa. It doesn't really matter what objectively is trying to happen. I think the key point is that these groups have a motivation to change the world in some way or another in order to do at least what they believe would be make it a better place. So why does this matter? Well, first off, the importance of these organizations. There's a lot of hype around the tech industry changing the world and really improving lives for everybody. But at the end of the day, the tech industry is still an industry. It's still a business. Much more often, where the real nitty-gritty day-to-day impacts on the public's quality of life happen are inside these civic organizations whose fundamental mission is not to make money, but to provide these kinds of services. And so the scale at which this happens is immense. There's a lot of opportunity there. And it's really conducive to what data science can provide. Because if we think about what data science can do for an organization, one of the main things it does is help organizations to use resources. And in civic organizations, resources are almost always scarce. And so there's a huge impact that data science can have, because it can make the way those resources are spent much more efficient. And when they are spent, it can make it more effective. But it's not just about this being something that is meaningful, important to do, and it gives you a good feeling. It's also surprisingly fun. That there's a lot of really exciting work. I mean, as you saw in the things we do, there's a huge variety of areas that you can work on here. And a lot of these are challenges that nobody has really addressed before. We're trying to blaze a new trail and figure out what it is that data science can do that the prior 400-something years of the city's existence hasn't been possible. And the people who work in this area, they're often some of the most smart and engaged people that you'll ever get the chance to work with. And there are so many opportunities for people who want to be creative and learn new skills and try something new and really take the lead on something. So I want to make my final pitch for all of you, and particularly those of you who are early in your careers and trying to figure out where you're going and what is your direction going to be. I would strongly recommend that you spend a few years working in this area, because ultimately it's going to give you a lot more opportunity than, say, if you were to go to a tech company, spend your first couple of years working on 1 or 2 projects as part of a large team where you have a very small niche carved out. Compare that to working at an organization like ours, where I will give you every opportunity in the world to try out new skills and take ownership of a new thing, and you'll get to work on dozens of different projects and really carve out a place for yourself. And so at the end of the day, even if long-term you want to make money, you're here to be a really marketable data scientist because you heard about it being the sexy and lucrative job, well, here's the thing. You're going to be a much better data scientist if you work for a group like ours that really needs you and are able to improve your skills. And when you do leave, you will be a much more marketable person than if you had just worked on 1 or 2 projects at a tech company for 2 or 3 years. So that's the end of my pitch. We have a website that I've linked here just giving more information about our team and some of the work we've done. And my contact info is here in case you all want to reach out to me directly. So thank you for listening. And we have a few minutes if anybody has any questions.
Hello. How does this overlap with the smart cities, using these internet-connected devices, IoT?
Yeah, so the IoT aspect, we work very closely with some of the organizations within the city, particularly around transportation, that are moving in those directions. For example, we've recently started work on a pilot project where we're collaborating with Verizon in order to put in sensors at intersections which can tell us not only how many cars are going through and how fast they're going, but things like, do drivers yield to pedestrians and so forth. And we're just starting down that road now. If that goes well, that would be the kind of thing that might feed into, say, the traffic crash predictions models that we use. Most of the data, though, is really internally based. It's not sensing what's going on around the city generally. It's seeing what we're doing and what we're observing in our day-to-day work. I think where we do get into more of an IoT thing is anything we do, and again, traffic and transportation-related things generally, I think are a big application of this. But things like GPS data from city vehicles, or connecting to the transit systems API to pull information about how long it's taking buses to go down their routes. Those are all data sources that are available to us, and I think there's a lot of opportunity there. Really, we're just getting started down that road.
So have you looked into the work on predictive policing? Because your predictive health inspections seem very similar. And what people found in predictive policing is that if they send police somewhere, they will find crime. And so this will enforce existing biases.
Yeah, and that's something that I'm very acutely aware of. And one of the things that that we've made a point to do is to separate some of our work from the investigative work that police does. We're definitely interested in helping them do things like manage their overtime and other performance aspects. The police department has their own analytic program, and we have a bit of a separation between that work. And in part, particularly because of these concerns you mentioned, what I desperately don't want to happen is that I certainly don't want to make some mistake that causes these biases to be reinforced. But even more broadly beyond that, I'm acutely aware of how politicized that can be. And so what I really don't want to do is to undermine all this other important work we're doing by opening us up to criticisms that we're being invasive of privacy and causing these issues. I think that said, though, there are responsible and ethical ways that you can do that. I think for us, one of the things that, when I think about how we could work with the police department on these kinds of things, I would probably be fine with, say, building a predictive model that would say, which areas are most likely to have crimes occur, in the next week. What I wouldn't feel okay with is to say, which people in our city are most likely to commit crimes. That's where problems happen, obviously, because we get into these situations with a lot of the work we do. For example, I mentioned the work about predicting who's likely to have a drug overdose. Well, obviously, there's a lot of privacy concerns around something like that. And the test for me is, well, all models are wrong. Some models are useful. So we're going to be wrong at some points. What happens if we're wrong? Now, for something like that overdose prevention program, what happens if we're wrong is somebody gets an awkward phone call or door knock from a social worker who's trying to help, and they say, no, thank you, I don't need you, and that person goes away. That's not a huge imposition. If we say, who's most likely to commit a robbery, and somebody gets arrested by mistake, that is not okay. And so, we do have to be very conscientious as we go through this to make sure we're not doing something that reinforces, potential biases or causes people harm in the course of trying to improve how we do things better.
Morning, Andrew. Thank you for your presentation. I had a question. Do you think there's like a ceiling for data in some areas? Like, for instance, the budget. If you make recommendations to the mayor on where money should be going based off past years, and he or she thinks, well, you know, I know how to work this better with the political side. I don't need data scientists telling me this sort of stuff. And how do you manage that? Just, I imagine there are other areas as well where it could get.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the problems really aren't that different from what you'd face doing data science in a private organization. That if you were to go to a CEO and say, hey, I know how to do our marketing better, you know, some people will be receptive to that, some people won't. The problems really aren't that much different than it would be elsewhere. You know, I think where it gets interesting, obviously, is government. It is political. You know, there are these questions of public spending, and ultimately it's a matter of having a good partnership. And for us, I think we've been really lucky that, you know, our team was created with the mayor's support as an initiative that ultimately came out of his State of the City address in 2015. And so, you know, we've had a great partnership with them at the leadership level to be able to do the things we want and, you know, have a real impact and open doors for us. So we've been fortunate. I think a lot of cities are moving in this direction, and generally the response has been great. But yeah, that's a challenge for anybody trying to do this kind of work.
I was wondering if you guys have made any efforts to address or to reach immigrant communities, because I know in Boston they're very segregated. And so I imagine that poses an extra challenge, and if you guys have any.
Yeah, so I mean, right now in particular is a difficult time when you think about immigration and data, and I've certainly had conversations about, do we have data that we do not want to be keeping given the current political climate? You know, I think actually I would have asked Chris to talk about this a bit more if you were mic'd up, but basically we've just started doing some work with our Mayor's Office of Immigrant Advancement to see what we can do for them. We haven't done a lot of work in that area specifically, but I think that question is addressed by some of the other things that we do have on our roadmap. For example, with our 311 system, which we use to direct citizen service requests, you know, we're very conscious of the fact that not everybody uses that system equally. And so we want to make sure that as we're doing this, we're not reinforcing disparities in service levels because the people who are living in the higher income areas or are more likely to speak English are more likely to use this system. We're very conscious of that because we don't want to deliver more services to people who are already doing quite well just because they complain more. So that's the kind of thing that we work on that I think does have a directly relevant impact. I know as a city, you know, we've done a lot of work in the area of making what we put out in the world accessible to everybody. So things like, you know, whether it's handicap accessibility of our website or providing things in multiple languages. For example, we just released a new application for the public schools that allows people who look at the school option for their children to see reports on the school's performance and quality. And we built this out in, I believe it was 6 different languages in order to make sure that this isn't something that's just helping the people who are English speakers first, because we are a large and diverse community, and that's a key thing for us.
Back here.
Yeah.
So since the early days of data science, the sexiest data science job was in the tech industry, as you mentioned. The pioneers of the term data science, I think, were at LinkedIn at the time. But there's so much interesting work going on in the public sector, and I'm wondering, besides giving talks like this, what sorts of things are you doing to create awareness around some of the cool problems that you're working on to appeal to people who might be interested in public service?
Yeah, so I think, well, talks like this are where things start, but certainly not where it ends. So I think one of the things that I'd highlight in that area is actually, I mentioned the new open data portal that we've been working on. The main difference between that one and what we have now as our V1 portal is that we're trying to move away from this being just a place to go and download data sets to be a place where people can go and interact with data, but also see what other people are doing and getting excited about that. So one of the features we have on the new site is the ability to showcase projects built off of our data, and we're trying to create a system where people will use our data, do cool things with that, and then send it back to us, and we can share that with the community get other people involved in development. We're also doing more and more collaborative projects. I mentioned the crash predictions work. That's a collaboration with a group of volunteer data scientists. And likewise, we've done a lot of work with the university community and so forth to try to get them involved in our work and ultimately bring people into this conversation, get them doing work and getting excited about work in the civic data science field generally and the city's work specifically. I think we have one more over here. Yeah, good question. It was about other cities. I'm actually part of a network of chief data officers where we have about 25 chief data officers from cities across the country, and most of the ones you would think of, New York, Philly, Chicago, LA, San Francisco, and so forth. We talk on a regular basis. We have working groups on areas like, for example, I run the tech infrastructure working group. We have another one on data standards and open data programs and so forth. And I think everybody's kind of figuring this out as they go. The first chief data officer for a city was only appointed about 5 years ago. And so this is still a very new field, and we're collaborating with each other on some projects, but also sharing a lot of knowledge and trying to figure out what are the best practices that are common across all of our cities. I think that's all the time we have. Well,
Welcome to SAFE.
yeah, well, thank you all very much for coming, and I will be around the rest of the day too if anybody wants to talk more, but thanks again. It's been a pleasure.